This is the TheAndresSegovia Show.
Hey everyone, it's Andres. Welcome to another episode of the program. If it wasn't obvious by looking at the setup behind me, I am a big fan of books, and I get to talk about just that with fellow author Kimberly Humphreys. I said fellow because if you're not aware, I'm also a published author. And I'm excited to share both her works and my works with you all and talk about how the space works, because it's some people probably wondering, how do you get into writing books and publishing? And I think it's very important if you are a budding writer yourself. But before I get into my interview with Kimberly, I need to talk to you about StreamYard. For those of you that have been following me long enough would know that StreamYard is my go-to software when it comes to content creation and streaming. My recording session with my guest today had some network issues on both ends for whatever reason. We checked everything was fine during the pre-interview until we started trying to get rolling, and then it wasn't. I had my concerns at first, but I'm like, I hope this doesn't turn out to be just an audio-only podcast. But because I was using StreamYard, which has local recording feature, and I did have it active when we started recording, I'm able to present an HD video interview with you all, and I could not have been able to do that without StreamYard. And if you're a fellow content creator wondering what software you can use out there for your own content creation, well, I highly recommend StreamYard. I am a partner with them, and my partner link is in the video description down below for those of you that are watching. Or, of course, at the show notes accompanying this episode at TheAndresSegovia.com. So I'm very grateful to StreamYard. Shout out to them. And without further ado, here is my interview with fellow author Kimberly Humphreys. All right, I'd like to welcome on to the TheAndresSegovia Show today author Kimberly Humphreys, someone that I've been familiar with as a parlor friend for a couple of years now, I think, and I'm happy to have her on the show. Kimberly, welcome to the TheAndresSegovia Show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And for those that may not be familiar with you and your work, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am an author. I have a Christian dystopian trilogy that I've written, independently published, and my latest release is a romantic thriller called The Agent Who Loves Me. And it's a bit different, but really exciting. I also blog and write essays on current events, mainly Christianity, but I do dive into politics a little bit.
And I am curious. I wanted to start it off by talking about, because you do have your latest work, The Agent Who Loves Me, but the Huntress War-Torn Trilogy. Could you survive socialism? Will faith be enough? 2 weeks without rations? Is it Kira? Only has one round left? She must hunt.
Yes. Okay, so to bring in the context of that world, that story budded in my heart in 2016. What I saw was in current events, I saw a chaplain get in trouble, an army chaplain get in trouble for having a Bible open on his desk. And, all these things just going on in the news about Christians being persecuted in America, being canceled, being ruined financially. And I'm just like, okay, I understand history enough to see where this goes. But I thought if I were to come up with a story, it would have to be outside of our current identity politics in order for people to receive it well. And so I decided to create a world dystopian in the future, 600 years ahead. And what happened was there was a war here in America. Christians were persecuted to the point of death. And there was a big split. And they won. The Christians won. And so they took over, they named it a different country and everything. A lot of people fled to Canada, and that became Ontario. And then all of the criminals basically were forced down below. So there was like a major influx of people coming up who believed in Christ and people going down who did not. And so that kind of became Kadain. And then Zandite was the very military-focused Christian nation. Well, Kira grew up in Ontario, and Ontario is very, very welcoming to everybody. It was an inclusive nation. It didn't, want to be military focused, and it just was all loving, all good, right? And so she was a prominent journalist. Okay, she was like the major talking head that everybody listened to her opinion on. And there was this leader coming up for election, and he was saying all the right things. So she supported him. and she got all of her followers, her fans, to support him. And this is her backstory. This is very laced in the book. I'm just giving it down so people understand
Of course.
the groundwork of her world. Well, when he got into office, he completely changed, and he turned against his voters. And it just spiraled very quickly into socialism. And the only reason why she was allowed to have a gun, the only reason why she was allowed to live in her house the way she did, instead of, community housing, was because of her former influence and wealth. So even so, she's in squalor. She's practically starving. Children at this point are property of the government. So she's having to hide her daughter because she doesn't want anybody to take her and to teach her, to be against God. And it's just a dark, dark place to be. And she doesn't lose her faith, even though it's now illegal. So she has to hide her cross necklace, and everything is just, it's wretched. And she goes out to hunt for food, and when she does, war breaks out in the sky above her, and a enemy pilot crashes. And that's basically the catalyst, because he's a Zandite, and she knows that she can get a reward for him if she turns him in. But she sees the broken pages, the ripped pages of a Bible around him. She's able to read the Bible in Psalms, even though it's a different language. She's able to understand that much. And she just feels God tell her to save him. And that's basically where her entire life changes. And it's about the struggle of her, coming out of that, and him seeing it, and then just the threats that are constantly there, daily, nightly threats, and her, maintaining her faith and God blessing her for it.
I like the premise. What would you grade the reading level for this? Like, which is your target audience for this?
I think teenagers and above. Like, it's mostly for adults, especially, I'm hoping lukewarm Christians, them to get a little bit more on fire, people who, trying to want to know about God but really don't. Anybody that wants to straighten their faith, it's a great story for that. And there's a lot of action in it, especially in the third book. There's a lot of action in it. So I think that some men would enjoy it too. But mainly it's for women.
For women?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about my daughter. My daughter's 11, and she's been enjoying just... my kids all love books, and actual books, not like Kindles or tablets. No, actual pick-up, honest to God, good printed book. Nothing can beat that book smell. And they just love getting lost in it. And every time we're at a store or somewhere and there's a Barnes & Noble, we just kind of gravitate towards it. We just go inside, and I don't always buy them a book, but I let them spend some time to just read something or whatever, then kind of like a library, and then we go. Especially since I'm not entirely sure what's available at Barnes & Noble nowadays that's kids safe and all that. But I have enjoyed seeing that they love picking up a book. So I have 4 kids. My daughter's the eldest, and as she's been reading I keep forgetting to call it this, because there's picture books, and then so-and-so's reading a chapter book now. I was like, what? Oh, you mean a book without pictures? It's like that. It didn't really hit me. So my daughter at first was apprehensive. She's like, I don't know. It's just a bunch of words. So they've seen Lord of the Rings, and they've seen Narnia. So I told the kids, like, hey, look, kids, come see this. And I just start flipping through the pages of this book, and I was like, you see any pictures? Like, no. What does the cover say? Like, oh, Lord of the Rings. It's like, yeah, it's on your head. This is where they got the imagination for the movie, and that's what kind of drew them to this, where you can really get lost in a good story. And like, I think for you and I, because I am also a published author, independently published too, it's that catalyst. Like, what got you to commit to writing, though? Because writing a book is different from writing a blog. How long did that, from inspiration to writing, editing, and publishing, how long did that take for you?
Oh gosh, over 3 years. Over 3 years for that. I didn't have time to write it down at all. My husband was overseas for a year, and I'm the sole taking care of our kids. So I wasn't able to do that until he got back. But whenever I did, it just flowed out. And so I wrote the first draft during Christmas vacation of 2017. So I got it out. I wrote, it's very choppy first draft. And out of that came the 3 books and years of editing, during the summers and, holidays, just getting it to where I wanted it to be. So I didn't publish it until 2020.
How did you feel that, like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna publish a book? It's like this isn't like some kind of draft. It's or like an essay, or just some short writing that you were committing to doing this. Did you ever have aspirations to be an author before this?
Since I was a little girl, okay. Since I read Little Women, I wanted to be like Joe. I've always loved writing. I wrote short stories. I actually won an award in first grade for my short story that I wrote.
Oh, cute.
So yeah, it's a little Genie Lamp award. But I still have it, and I've always wanted to be a writer. Always. I actually wrote 2 other self-published novels, fiction, years ago, that I've since taken out. I think that as a writer I've improved, and I want to revisit them later. But yeah, it's just part of who I am. I let it out, it just flows out.
I have a trilogy novel of my own, but it's not meant to be a trilogy. First, it's supposed to be 1 book, which is now 3, and I'm working on the 4th. So it's I don't. So at the end, it might be 5 or 6 novels total. It's a romantic comedy series that was inspired by a Korean drama that my wife loved, and she always said, "I want to watch this with you." So it's Korean. You're Taiwanese. Why am I going to watch a 20-hour? Drag out the story as long as possible romance thing. So, but then I eventually watched it, and half of it was like suspense, thriller, killer stuff. Like, hold on, this is romantic comedy? It's like,
that's awesome.
Wait, yeah. If we can do that, then hey, I'm inspired to do something of my own. So that kind of got things going with mine, and it's called The Many Misadventures of Enoch Bellagio, and it's really derived from experiences in my life that I'm telling the story of how I met my wife through this character, and the whole story is up here. So all I had to do was commit it to writing, and as I was doing it, it's like I don't like the catharsis. Like, why is it happening so soon? So then eventually I'm like, you know what? I think I have to drag this story out a little, not just 1 novel. It broke up into several, then a couple of story arcs, and eventually the catharsis has to happen towards the end of the 3rd book. So like, this was supposed to be like almost 3/4 of the way in the 1st book. It just wouldn't have made sense for the reader. It's just like, and those little things, it just happen along the way. This wasn't my first foray into writing. I've been writing myself for, I don't know, almost 2 decades. Have you found yourself kind of like me, getting too connected to your characters, where you're like, man, I don't want this to happen to them, but if it does, like, how do I move on from that?
That is the hardest part of writing fiction, I think, because they say that you have to have the worst things happen to your characters. Like, it's just like, but yeah, especially when you're really, really attached to them. It's so hard.
And did you find that maybe even drawing from your own life experiences to put into those characters made it easier to write or more difficult to write?
Easier.
Easier? Yeah.
Easier, yeah.
I found the same thing too. It's like, well, this scenario like that. But when you're, in my case, in deriving from certain events that actually did happen in my life, and some of them traumatizing too, I found myself having to stop. I can't keep writing. I can't see through the tears. So there's a little too much when you get all invested in it. But that's for a romantic comedy series. But I am developing my own fantasy novel. I actually introduced my character in a fan fiction just to see how people will react. Like, how would they react to an original character in this universe and that style? And most of everybody has read the fan fiction. Like, hey, that one character you wrote, he's actually pretty cool. That's like, oh, good. So would you like to learn more about him? And I told my then girlfriend, now wife, I'm like, look, if I ever publish that book, the first book, and what I call a chronicle of that character, I probably would be doing so around the time my daughter's in college. Like, that far ahead, that far. Is like, yeah, because this isn't one of those I'm rushing, and it has been in development for that long. I've written quite a bit, but I run into that moment where, like, I created a scenario where, like, it would be a disservice to the audience if all of them come out alive from this. So now it's been kind of like, okay, who's gonna get the short end of the stick here? Because like that's where I kind of been stuck. It's like, oh man, and it's like, well, what does it matter? You're the writer, you can control it. But sometimes I just feel like in going with the flow of things, like I'm learning too. I'm like, where's this story going? But I did run into that where like, man, I have to say bye to some of these. I would hate to see that, but that's me getting lost in these characters that only exist in my mind.
Well, they're like imaginary friends. They really are. I mean, you get that close to them. At least I do. I mean, it's just like, you love them. You can help them up. That's how I feel. One thing is about the imaginary process, though, is that it always seems to read more. Like, I've noticed that whenever I'm writing one story, another story, like, wants to, bud. And I have to write a page on that and then set it aside so that I don't get sidetracked and then have, 5 different stories going and then never finish them. Because I used to do that when I was younger. So I forced myself. I think I read about this somewhere. I don't have the receipt for that. Somewhere I read that. Great advice that you write it down like a paragraph, 2, maybe 3 paragraphs, and then set it aside and go back to it later so that you can write the end on what you're currently working on.
Yeah,
and the real work begins.
Yes. Oh, I know. Oh my goodness. That the editing part is I think I learned the most. Where like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I learned that the hard way when it came to writing. So when I wrote the second book that I published, I'm like, I'm more prepared this time for that. And I started taking it a chapter at a time instead of just drafting the whole thing. But it was the third book that I would say I had the hardest time with. The third entry, and it's the shortest one, ironically. I rewrote that story 3 times. Like, I just tossed it all out. I didn't like it. I'm like, no, it reads like a school textbook. It's boring because the character there is oh my goodness, philosophy teacher. So a lot of it's very philosophical. I'm like, how do I make something boring and mundane interesting? And I keep thinking to that movie, The Social Network, where it's about Facebook. How do you do a movie about a dude creating a website simultaneously with 2 lawsuits, one of the best movies ever made in American history? I'm like, those are very boring subjects on their own, and it works. I'm like, how do I approach that? And I feel like I hit that formula, and the third book was very well received too, especially this is catharsis for the character. It had to be, so a lot was writing on it, and I did enjoy that. And how did you feel when you put your book out there? It's like putting yourself out there, but when you put your book, your trilogy out there, what did you expect would happen?
I didn't expect the feedback I got. I didn't expect the amazing positivity that I got. I expected to get canceled. I expected to not. I mean, it's kind of a controversial subject. But no, I was amazed at the positive feedback and how many people reviewed it and how many people would talk to me on Parler and just like it was a God thing. Now I can't take credit for that because that was God working through me, and He just touched their heart, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful to see. Really.
No, that's awesome. I'm assuming you didn't. The way I did it was with a private reading group before I published it. So was it you and maybe your husband, or did you have a small reading group to say like, how's this reading before I,
Yeah, just real intimate, very small. Just 2 people. Just those I trust.
Yeah, and I think that's what I told them. You guys got to be honest with the feedback. Maybe there'll be people that they'll be impacted by this, and in a positive way. And first the intimate circle is one thing, right? But then when it finally got out there and the feedback I was receiving for it, I think it's serving its purpose. So a friend of mine told a coworker, like, oh yeah, my buddy wrote a series of books, and that very evening she ordered the first one, and she burned right through it, and she told my friends, like, I ordered the rest of them, and she finished them. It's like, is there more? I'm like, holy smokes, that's awesome. That's those are the testimonies I want to hear,
Yeah.
That they're drawn to it.
Yeah, it's nothing like connecting with readers, especially strangers that you don't know, when they reach out to you, and it's like, oh my gosh, taking the time to give your work a chance anyway is amazing. Just them reading it is amazing. But then them taking the time to actually say something positive about it, oh, it's just awesome.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that, well, first off, for people that didn't catch it, what inspired your story was that an army chaplain was in trouble because he had an open Bible on his desk. Was it? It's like
Yep.
it's in his work. It's like, but
Well, like that's like I didn't base it on him. That particular incident isn't in the story, but just the
of course,
fact that that happened. My husband and I were married by an army chaplain. Okay, so I grew up. I knew missionaries, who went to, Russia, and they were like rock stars. Okay, because like it was it was very dangerous back then,
mm,
and you know we can't let that happen here. And it's happening here. It's
mm,
happening here in more ways than people realize it's happening. And that's gotta stop. And it's just it's horrendous. And I just felt inspired by God to just come up with a story to show the difference between a free society and a very socialist and a recently fallen socialist. And
mm,
basically it's like Antifa, crazy drug addicts living in, community housing that are kept in control by drugs from the state.
mm,
And drones, the technology is there for drones to surveil everything, but they don't have electricity. They
mm.
it just starvation everywhere. It's really a horrible, horrible situation that the main character goes through. But I believe that can happen very quickly to any nation. I mean, look at what happened to Venezuela. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
they went from having prosperity to eating zoo animals.
yeah.
Okay, so it's not like we're immune from that happening. It can happen anywhere.
Yeah, and I think a free society, especially one that's in relative comfort, is more susceptible to having that happen. It is very fascinating how things can go, and I actually do appreciate the world that you created there. Just by hearing it, I'm excited to pick that up because I want to hear what my daughter would think of it. I think she's at the maturity level that I think she'll get it, but I want to read it myself too. I like that whole thing where what you perceive as your enemy isn't your enemy, kind of thing, because I think that's a very important contrast. How we're programmed to hate someone, even without knowing them, and then realizing that hey, they're just like me. Um, it's I think that's a we get lost in all the banter and the propaganda out there that's made to divide us. I absolutely hate that.
Identity politics. Yeah. Identity politics. It's like what about individualism? It's toxic. And it's communist. I mean,
Hmm.
look at what happened during Mao's China. All right, the Red Army. I mean, turning family against family. Everybody had to basically worship him, or they were shamed, they were canceled, they were killed. I mean, and it's that kind of division and that kind of mob frenzy can happen anywhere,
Hmm.
and we are witnessing it in small pockets all the time here. It's very, very scary because nobody wins. I mean, look
Hmm.
at the Red Army. What happened to them? They ended up in slave labor camps too. It didn't go well for them. Bolsheviks didn't go well for them. It never goes well. So it's like I don't understand why people keep repeating it. But I see it right now. I see it, you know, all this hatred against Trump supporters. And it's like, those are Americans. Those are still Americans. At the end of the day, like, what I always fall back to is whenever I watched, the Twin Towers fall, okay, I didn't care. I didn't care what their skin color was. I didn't care who they loved. I didn't care, how they voted. All I cared about was that those were Americans and they were dying.
Hmm.
And that was enough to make me cry. Okay, that was enough for me to be so upset. And that was all that was needed. We need to get back to that as a nation before we
Yeah.
reach the point of no return. Because it's so dangerous where we're at right now.
I agree, and it just feels like that was 23 years ago, and it feels like it could have been ages ago. Because like, what happened to United We Stand? It's like we're
Yeah.
literally on the part where divided we fall. We're falling. My goodness. Um, I wanted to ask you about the publishing side, but this kind of segues into what you call your essay, what I call a very epic short story. Let me get the name right, because it's an alternate timeline. How America Fell. This is from your blog, which is you call My Paper Blog, or is that the title of your of the story? My Paper Blog, How America Fell. That's the
Yep.
actual story, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the audience about it before we dive into that and kind of spoil it?
Okay. Whenever I saw on July 13th,
Mm.
whenever I saw what had happened to Trump, I I was just thanking God. I was thanking God. I stayed up all night in prayer, thanking God, because I grew up I grew up in a very, very poor area in Los Angeles County. Okay. I grew up, I was 8 years old during the Rodney King riot. And like, yes, police brutality is horrible. I I don't really want to, get into that right now. But what I went through as a child was terror. I went through so many gunshots, so many people just acting crazy because the law enforcement wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in our neighborhood, it just so happened to be a Hispanic gang, but everywhere, white, black, it didn't matter. Every criminal was having at it, looting, rioting, shooting guns, just acting crazy, breaking into houses. I mean, it was everybody. And so I saw that as a young child, and it left such an impression on me on how, we're all the same. We really are. And we can all be really good, or we can all be really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I had that kind of memories, like those memories just kind of like, oh my gosh, what on a grander scale, with how divided our country is right now, with how many riots there are happening, like in England right now. Oh my gosh, like you just brought up
Yeah.
that earlier, but yeah, which by the way, it's mostly white people doing the looting there. This idea that people get where they put, everybody has to be blanketed by the color of their skin. I can't stand that. I
Mm-hmm.
can't. So I just I thought of that, and I saw, the division of race, the division of, gay versus straight, or straight versus gay, whatever. All these divisions, and based on how people vote, we would be in so much trouble. We'd be in so much trouble, and I also know what it looks like when the law enforcement's not there. And if that had happened, I just came up with this idea of how bad and how fast we would have fallen as a nation. And so I put it in the perspective of a lady who who grew up in LA, a fashion blogger who was very successful, millions of followers on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband deployed, army, uh, alone with her little daughter to take care of. And all this stuff goes down. And because of, interjected my experiences as her with the seeing how people went wild and how scary it was during that time in LA in 92. She went out and got prepared as fast as she could. And even while she's still getting prepared, things start to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And they start to collapse more. And it just goes through every stage of what I envisioned just from my own imagination. What would have happened if that assassination attempt had been successful? So
Yeah.
it's my contribution to uh, get people to stop hating each other, and to understand that hating, as I said in the author's note, hating your fellow countrymen for whatever reason is basically hating ourselves. It's killing ourselves. It's suicide. And everybody just needs to stop, because we're so weak. We're so weak, and I really believe that we could collapse if we don't knock it off.
Yeah, and I have that same sentiment where we're human. And like you, I'm from Compton Watts, the border right there.
Oh,
That's where I grew up with the Rodney King riots too. My church was spared from the firebombing. The right next to it, the black church for some reason was set ablaze, including the plaza next to that. And I'm like, I don't understand how
well,
that's supposed to address police brutality when you're hurting the people that were affected by it. But
yeah.
my church was spared. But yeah, in the midst of all that, the gasoline stations blowing up, the truck drivers being taken out of their big rigs and beaten to a pulp and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't forget National Guard rolling down downtown Los Angeles without bullets, but they were rolling down there. It's I must have been 7 or 8, probably the same age as you. So we might have been neighbors and not know that. But
What a time to be alive.
right, right. But yeah, and in reading your How America Fell, I was reading it as that alternate timeline had it happen in this way, and yeah, I can see a lot of that. A lot of that happening, but without spoiling the ending of it, and I'm like, that's an allegory. If I ever saw one, I probably wouldn't have labeled it a nation. But I think that you were right in what succeeds after that. I'll tell you afterwards. But it's just it was an engrossing read. You did draw, I felt, a lot of inspiration from your experiences, and you kind of say it at the notes there too of the riots, because yeah, some people don't understand. It was nuts. My father ended up putting up a block wall in front of the property to catch the bullets that were flying into the home.
Yes.
So,
I had to
people
sleep in the
don't get
bathtub.
this.
I was that girl in the bathtub because it was just so bad. It was tremendous. It was a war zone. That's
Yeah.
what it sounded like, especially as a child. It's just like so scary. So scary.
Yeah, and it was because of those, I guess, historical events, and I guess we remember these things, right? And we see how things can play out, and like we've seen this before. It was about a month and a half or so. I was doing a stream during quarantine, and not that I was in the quarantine, but the entire country was, 2 weeks. Too flat in the curve. So we were I was with a couple of buddies of mine, and we were just talking movies and things. And eventually, I mentioned that I don't like the way things are looking, based on nothing has really transpired yet. But I'm like, I don't like people being cooped up the way they are, and things being so tense the way they are. It's like, why? It's like, because I feel that we're about to enter a phase of looting and rioting at a nationwide level, akin to LA, but this is throughout the country. So that was, I think, around March or early April, at least a month and a half before the George Floyd riots. So I'm like, man,
Oh gosh.
I really felt like Ian Malcolm. Man, I hate being right all the time. So it really felt, I was like, dude, this is what I was talking about, man. It's like, so it didn't surprise me when that occurred. It's just sad to see. And some of these stories that draw upon real experiences, or even are a fable to warn of what could happen, I believe are important, and we do need more of it. But what made you want to do this as a blog post style, though?
I just wanted to give it away. I just wanted people to read it. And she lost electricity, so I put it down. And that's why it's my paper blog, because she went from being, a digital, influencer, to being reduced to pen and paper. And that's why some of the words are crossed out, like it's been done in a different font. It's because she's just writing it down, on paper, and that's why it's by day instead of chapter. And I didn't give anybody this. I mean, her daughter, the diva, the nickname, yes, but I didn't give anybody names because I wanted everybody reading it to really put themselves in it. I wanted them to, really relate to what was happening without all the, separation, distraction of that. I wanted it to be more personal for the readers, because I feel like it's what I can do. It's what I can do to try to contribute to making America better. And that's, I don't know. It's just a message that I hope people receive well. And I've gotten some pretty good feedback on Parler. It's a hard read for anybody watching this out. It's an emotional roller coaster, and it is not a pleasant experience. So, and I don't recommend it for younger readers at all. 18 and up is what I would say. Even though, I'm Christian, I don't have cussing in it. I don't have descriptive, befores, and it's still, it's hard. It's a hard one. But at the end, in the author's note, I just poured my heart out, and I used the scripture I thought was the best for the messaging of love, to love your neighbors, because we're stronger that way. We don't have to agree. It doesn't mean, oh, we got to agree on everything. It doesn't mean that we have to think alike, look alike, or any of that. We don't. As a matter of fact, that's part of what makes America awesome, is the fact that we are all different, and we do all have different things to bring to the table, different talents, different backgrounds, different ideas. It's why we've been such a successful melting pot for hundreds of years. And I really don't want that to be destroyed. And it really, really scares me with this dangerous political climate that we're in right now.
Yeah, it feels like we're slow motion watching a car crash and we just can't stop it. It just just move out of the way. That's what it really feels like. And not to be a downer for folks that are watching and listening, is just, well, if you're plugged into the pipeline, you see it. Social media isn't real life, but it does have an influence on people, and sometimes people react to what they see on social media, be it real or imagined. And it's just it's sad that we are programmed in that way. But I do want to give a shout out to the Parler peeps out there that should be watching, not just maybe watching, should be watching, because yes, I felt that there's a community there that most of you, I've seen that they've really supported you along the way. And I did have another, you might have been familiar with him, Tommy Liberty, Rucksack Radio. I'm assuming you were with.
Yes, I was on a show a couple years ago.
Yes, I'll have to ask you a question after that. But I did have him on my show. We finally did like our crossover back in spring when I was doing an exclusive for Rumble. And I'm like, dude, I just feel we got to just do our show together already. So why don't you come on my show? It's going to be live, though. So just giving you a heads up. And we did it. Oh, that was one of the best. We were talking about political discourse and how we lost it like nowadays. Like, what happened to just being able to have a conversation with folks and agree to disagree? And he and I, even though we were coming at such an issue from a different perspective, at the very end, people were hard pressed to find out, wait, you guys disagreed? So no, we just found ourselves agreeing more than we didn't. And that was okay. You can have civil discourse. It's just really hard to find. And John Mates over at Hedgehog that he started, even they saw this and like, it's that was a fun conversation. But I also dropped the mention, we are a society that has access to more information than ever before, and we couldn't be more ignorant. It really is incredible. I think what really drives points home in a society that sometimes feel like they're all ADHD, it's stories like the ones you're telling. That you put in morality and value embedded into your stories, that helps drive people to make those connections where sometimes it's not overtly there, a message that they would probably reject if they heard it as it was, like, no, I'm not interested in that, but in a story form, like, it'll make sense to them. They gain context. That's what people connect with comic books and stuff. Sometimes when it drives that way, that's why the woke mobs try to take over all that stuff, because they know the power and influence of it. But I think storytelling is still a very powerful medium, and I'm glad that you tapped into it. Similar to how I first started my own blog, was just kind of burying my soul out there, because I come from a very dark mindset, and when I put it out there, I'm like, I don't know, it's like this or whatever. I'm just kind of, I have no one to talk to except myself, so I put it out there. Then I'm having people that know me respond to me in private, telling me, I thought I was the only one. I'm so glad I wasn't the only one, and someone understands me. Like, wait, but you're always smiling and happy. What's going on here? And that's helped me connect better with certain friends of mine that we had some misunderstandings before. So that's why storytelling is a very powerful medium, and I think you really hit the nail on the head there with your My Paper blog, How America Fell.
Thank you. Well, it's been a very powerful medium for centuries. I mean, since before there was even words to write, people told stories and they were passed down. There's a lot of power in that, and I really appreciate the kind word that everyone that it commented on it on Parler said. It's so uplifting, but I also it's encouraging, because whenever they talk about it affecting them emotionally, I know that's God working through me. And
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing more satisfying than that. So it's just like, oh, it's like, okay, but that was God. He wanted, to use that to, get get his will out there. Love your neighbor. It's so powerful.
Yeah, it's awesome that you give credit to him too. That's kind of that's kind of
Yeah.
my approach there too. At the acknowledgments, like Lord, you got me through this story, so thank you for letting me tell it, and you do with it what you will. Let it arrive to the
Or
hands of the people that it'll benefit and could use the benefit. They didn't realize that they needed. But and having said all that, there were two things that I wanted to touch on before we start wrapping up here. One of them was publishing because you decided to go independent with this. What prompted you to publish this independently instead of going through one of the publishers out there, be it Christian or the secular publishing companies out there?
okay, well, I have my romantic thriller that I wrote is picked up by a publisher, and
Okay.
I'm very thankful for that. That's the only thing. And I'm amazed. And that publishing house has nothing to do with any of my other work at all. Not my blogs, nothing. Just that one story.
Mm.
Um, just to put that out there. But I went independent. I could not get them published. I could not. I couldn't even get. I was able to get an auction through the ACFW where I had a critique of the first three chapters that I won through the bid through that, which is an awesome tool that they had. And it was just they didn't know what it was going to be, but I
Mm.
won it and they got it. And the ACFW is the American Christian Fiction Writers Association, really awesome for anybody wanting to go into that field to join. There's so many resources. The conferences are great.
Mm.
I'm very happy to be a member. I've been a member since 2018. So I got that. I got some really good feedback from that. But I tried to pay editors to take it. It would, I think it was because a lot of people say that Christian fiction just doesn't sell. That it
Really?
just doesn't sell. That's what they say. And it's better to have it be right living instead of anything preachy. And I guess
Interesting.
mine was just too preachy because I mean in the War Torn trilogy, oh, the main character only survives by scripture. That's where she gets her strength from. It's the only way that she's directed and read, and that comes from my own experience of having that. Whenever we just moved to Texas, and I had a toddler and twin babies. Um, my toddler was just diagnosed with autism, and then
Mm.
one of my other daughter, my youngest daughter, had serious heart condition, oxygen being tube. My husband was gone. Okay,
Mm.
the army was sending him, and I didn't know anybody. Okay, so and I had these kids that needed me to be strong, and I was a lukewarm Christian before that.
Mm.
Right, I was very lukewarm, but I got to know God in a way that I can't ever go back from. I can't. It, the strength that I got just from prayer and reading the Bible, man, it was so personal, and it was everything that I needed to be what they needed for my kids. And after experiencing that, I mean, I put that in there. So to me, I'm not trying to be preachy. I'm not trying to be judgy. I'm not trying to be, condemning or any of that. It's just that is where I get my strength from. So of course, with this character, well, I want to succeed, and he's going through so much more than I did. That's the only right. I could see her getting her strength from, and I wanted to honor him. I wanted to honor God through that because he helped me so much in real life. So that's part of it too. And it just I got rejected. I got rejected. I've been rejected. Oh gosh. I have written okay, so I've written two other secular stories, could not get them published, one independent. With
Mm.
those, and like I said earlier, I'm gonna have to revisit them.
Mm.
I wrote a story about my daughter with heart disease, her struggle, what we went through with that. And I got rejected for that because I didn't have a big enough following on social media.
Mm.
Um, and then I got rejected for the War Torn trilogy, and I was rejected for two other stories that are science fiction that I am going to self-publish later on.
Ooh.
Yeah, I've been writing. I'm prolific. I write. That's what I do
That's
in my
good.
spare time. So
That's good.
it's been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rejections.
Oh man.
And I know I'm not alone in that. Have you tried querying agents and gone through that?
I'm actually in the process of talking to one of them. So, and this week, as we record, I'm actually speaking to another fellow author in the science fiction space that is also a publishing company. So that's going to be an interesting conversation to have. This week for me is for some reason book week, so that's when I'm like, oh, good, I get to talk all things books. But similar to what you mentioned, there was a fellow real estate professional out in Texas. His name is Rodney Powell. He found me through social media. We connected because he saw a video of mine when I was taking a stand for freedom of speech that meant leaving my real estate association due to that. And
Oh, wow.
that's how we connected. He eventually did publish his first novel. And while it preaches a message, it wasn't overtly Christian in that respect, where you might take it like, oh, this is a religious book of sorts. It's called The Pardon. It's an excellent read. When I read it, he sent me an advance copy and asked me if I was willing to endorse it. So I did. So it's the first novel that I have endorsed. I unfortunately could not endorse the second one. I think he was a little bummed out by that, but my schedule just couldn't fit it in. But either way, he did follow it up with The Ransom. And in reading it, I'm like, I felt the God's message in the book without it needed to be overtly, like religious or preachy and things like that. And I don't know if he got it. I'm assuming it's a publishing company because I felt the promotional push was pretty big. I just don't know if it was a Christian company. I have to ask him about that. So I'll bring that up to him. But yeah, the rejection part, it was something I just felt like I wanted to try Amazon first. For self-publishing, the tools at the time were more friendly to independent publishers, and since then they've grown to give even more things to independent publishers. But I feel that eventually, if I'm going to combine some of the books together for a big sell-off, that would be through a major publishing company, because I'm like, well, I think this could get out there tomorrow. I'm curious to see what they might say to that. Otherwise, it'll probably be my epic fantasy novel or series of books that I'm planning out for still a little ways out, but it's still in the works. Yeah, I'm glad you didn't give up though, because you needed to get your story out there.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I can't. And if anything, it's made my skin a little thicker, a little stronger.
Yeah. And now you have your latest book. It's a
Yep.
espionage thriller and romantic, I'm assuming, because it's called The Agent Who Loves Me. And this one you said is with a publishing company. How did this one come about?
Okay. Well, this one actually, it took me 3 years to write this one as well. Okay. But the original seed for this was a lot further back than that. Whenever I heard all these things coming out about the NSA and Edward Snowden, what he leaked, I was like, oh, even if it's not true, that can be such good fiction. I could use that in so many ways. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna put that in a folder in my brain and use that another time. I read an article and I don't have to repeat this because this was so long ago. Like, this is before we can even take screenshots. Okay,
Nice.
at least not on my phone that I had. A little flip phone. But it was there was an article about NSA agents actually using their surveillance capabilities. They got in trouble for spying on their significant others. And I was like, oh my gosh, what kind of a story could well write from that? And I don't know who the names were or any of the details in that article I read, right? So I was like, can I sit on that? Well, flash forward, and now, I mean, it's like so much worse now. I mean, our privacy is basically dead. I mean, you
Yes.
can't, and it's not so much about like the topic of government intrusion in our lives, right? Which is unconstitutional without a warrant, So it's not just about that. There's not that in there. This is about the idea of anyone being able to hack into your webcam. I guess I've heard that it takes under a minute to do so. It's about anybody being able to use all of these electronic devices that we're so addicted to, dependent on, to watch our every move and know everything about it. And so what happens is I came up with this idea for a social media company that is completely different. It's basically a pyramid scheme for women to go on, and it's like a clean kind of OnlyFans, kind of like totally different. It's completely different, and basically they're selling fantasy and they're supposed to stick to certain rules. And the champions are the middle there, you can vote them up, right? And so the main character in the story, she, her childhood sweetheart, they grew up in Iowa. Okay, went into politics. She went in college, went in politics. She became a nurse, and then they get back together, and she moves to DC to be with him, and he's not getting paid much. He's as a staffer, he's not getting paid anything. She's making more money. She was a VA nurse. She works at a VA hospital, and he dumps her. She gets dumped because he wants to be with a senator's daughter, who's social media is called Beatable Him, and they just star in there. And so he did it for political reasons. So she goes on a platform and hopes to gain him back. She's kind of insecure. She just wants him back. She wants her childhood sweetheart back, her best friend back. But what she gets is a stalker. And he knows everything about her. She had an alias, but yet he knows everything. And she's scared to death, and all these horrible things happen. And eventually, she gets questioned by a federal agent, and he's just like, I think that this is the serial killer I've been looking for years. And she's like, hey, oh my gosh. And then and then a fake agent ends up in her life, and she's attracted to both of them. There's this little love triangle going on, where they're trying to find this guy trying to kill her. And it's just a wild ride.
Does it have overtly religious themes like the previous ones?
No, none at all.
Oh, okay.
No, there's no cussing in it. There's no descriptive sex. I mean, there is attempted rape. There is some violence in it, but the hard topics like suicide. I wouldn't recommend it for anybody under 18, just because of that. But it is it's not Christian themed in that sense. But there's no sex in it, anything like that. So and it's not based on any real people. It's just the idea of having somebody be able to watch every movie you make. Just
yeah, that's big tech every single day. Yes.
Yes. Yep. Listening in.
Yeah, absolutely. When I cover tech, that's one of the primary things I do on my show. I cover tech from everything from showing people how to use it to also warning them about the big tech oligarchs and how they use our data and sell us off and things like that. I mean, that was one of the big contentions for you and I felt when Starboard bought Parler and kept our data, brokered it out to God knows who, and we had no access to any of it. Like, what? But now here we are in Parler 3.0, and hopefully back stronger than better than ever under new leadership and not any of those Starboard guys. But of course, time will tell. But yeah, and all these are available on Amazon. Are these all ebooks?
Yeah, you can get ebook. My paper blog is on my website only. It's for free there. Anybody can go on that on KimberlyHumphreys.com. But my books are all available on ebook, paperback, and I even have for the AJ Lesbian audiobook too. So,
okay. Did you read it or someone else read it for the audiobook?
No, it's through Amazon. No. No.
Okay. Well, that's cool. Yeah, I thought about doing the audiobook versions of my stories because during the lockdown 4 years ago, my goodness, I was inspired by one of the Benghazi heroes, Mark Osgeist. He ended up doing on Facebook Live just reading the book 13 hours. I'm like, you know what? That's an idea. What if I read Finding Love? And some of my friends that had the book and some of their kids that had the book, I'm like, well, they have to be at least this age and above to read it, just because, especially where it goes. But they're like, dude, reading it with you was like a whole other thing because it really hits a different emotional level. I'm like, oh, really? Yeah. So it kind of inspired me. It's like, I feel like I kind of have to read it because I know what I'm trying to drive home through the text. So I just need the time, so I'll see about that. But it sounds like an exciting thing. I don't know if I'll do Audible, though. I don't know how that stuff will work with rights management and all that, but I will look into it because it is interesting. Because for you with, you said it was Amazon, so you went through Audible?
I'm not sure who my publisher is, honestly. I believe so.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah. I think I should know, but yeah. Yes.
Yeah, because if it is Amazon, I'm assuming it's going to be Audible because it's an Amazon company too.
Yeah, I think
it'll be a good place to be.
I've heard it. It sounds good. I'm impressed with it. So I like how it sounds. But that's all new to me. It wasn't available when I self-published later, but I suppose I could put it out in there now. But
I wonder if
it wasn't available back then.
Fascinating. Well, I'm glad to hear that the books are also available in print because I will go out to purchase them in print. I want to have those so I could hold them. So
Yes.
the trilogy is called The Huntress, War-Torn Trilogy.
The War Torn trilogy. Yeah, that's it's the Huntress War Torn trilogy book 1, and then the Lineage War Torn trilogy book 2, and then the Confirmed War Torn trilogy book 3.
And then, of course, your latest release, The Agent Who Loves Me, all available on
Yes.
Amazon. And folks, you know the drill. Whether you're watching or listening, find those links because they'll be available in the show notes accompanying this episode at TheAndresSegovia.com. Kimberly, I'll give you the last word. Where can people follow you to keep up with your writings and your little 2 cents on social media?
You can find me Kimberly Humphreys at Parlor. That is my number one place. I post stuff there that I don't post everywhere else, and usually more pictures of my dogs there. I love the community there. They've been very, very warm and accepting to me. And you can also find me on Wordsmith Kim on X, and Kimberly Humphreys on
and your website is
KimberlyHumphreys.com.
Yeah, there you go. Pretty straightforward, folks. It's her name. Well, Kimberly, this has been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you all the best with your writing endeavors. And I'm really curious about this whole science fiction thing because I'm really big on science fiction. I don't know if you can see from over there, but right here you can see the X-Bands. I have the entire series because, wow, that is a heck of a story. But for another time.
Thank you for having me.
And that does it for this episode of The Andres Segovia Show. If you haven't done so already, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you can stay in the know. Follow me across the socials at The Andres Segovia on X _Andres Segovia. And I'll see you in the next one.